A family is supposed to be the safest place. But today, it became a battlefront. At a birthday party that should have been filled with laughter, the people I love most held my daughter down. They used scissors to cut the hair she was so proud of, and they laughed as she cried. They called it a lesson and told me not to make a fuss. I didn't make a fuss. I made a plan. When the people you trust most are the ones who cruelly hurt your child, where does loyalty to family end? I am Michael, a U.S. Army sergeant. People often think my life revolves around discipline and orders. They are not wrong. But my world has always been divided into two halves. One half is the sound of metal, the smell of gunpowder, and clear commands that leave no room for choice. There, everything is black or white, life or death, mission complete or failure. Emotions are a luxury that must be controlled. The other half is when I come home. The other half is when I come home to Sarah, my wife. She pulls me away from my rigid soldier persona, lightening every burden from the battlefield. She is more than my partner. She is my most solid support, someone who understands me even in my silence. We have been through months of separation, long-distance calls filled with static, and simple promises that I would return. Then Grace appeared, our little daughter, the most perfect gift. With her, our house wasn't just a place to live, but a real home. This family is my pride, my safe harbor, the happiness I would never trade. For me, leave is the only time I get to live fully with what matters most. My family. No more gunfire, no more commands, just breakfast together, afternoons walking with my daughter, and evenings listening to Sarah talk about her day. Every moment is simple, but to me, it's more precious than any medal. My leave was just approved when we received an invitation. The 12th birthday of Bella, my brother David's daughter. Grace had been counting down the days. She wasn't just excited to see her cousin. She had a special reason. Dad, can I go to a hair salon? A real one? I looked at Sarah, who smiled. Okay, little warrior, I said. And so, my daughter spent the whole morning being pampered. When Grace came out of the salon, she looked like a little angel. Her long, silky hair was styled into soft curls, with one side braided and adorned with tiny pearl clips. In the car, she couldn't stop looking at herself in the rearview mirror, a radiant smile she couldn't hide. We dropped her off at David's house. Karen, my sister-in-law, opened the door with a smile that now, looking back, I realize was off. But at the time, I didn't pay attention. Family is always the safest place, at least. That's what I thought. We're going to get some stuff for the barbecue this weekend, I told David. We'll be back in about an hour. Sarah and I were gone for exactly an hour. We bought beer, charcoal, and some decorations for my own welcome home party. It was normal, peaceful, until we turned onto their street. From a distance, I saw her, Grace, a small figure huddled on the front steps. Something was wrong. It was the same alarm signal you get on the battlefield, the cold feeling that warns of approaching danger. I stopped the car at the curb and got out, with Sarah right behind me. As we got closer, I saw it clearly. Grace looked up, and my heart stopped. Her hair, it was gone. Not a new hairstyle. It was ruined. Someone had used something, probably kitchen scissors, and chopped her hair. The hair was patchy and uneven, some parts down to her chin, others just past her ear. It looked brutal. It looked like a punishment. She wasn't crying. That's what hurt me the most. She was just sitting there, shoulders hunched, trying to make herself as small as possible, as if she wanted to disappear. Her eyes were empty, an emptiness I had seen in young soldiers after their first battle, utterly broken. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. A cold anger ran down my spine, but I suppressed it. In the military, when everything falls apart, you are trained to focus on a single objective. My objective was sitting there, shattered. Protect her, get her to safety. That was all that mattered right now. I walked over and knelt down in front of her. I didn't ask what happened. She wasn't ready to talk. Instead, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it, "Come on, Grace. Let's go inside." I placed a hand on her back, a gentle but firm touch, and helped her up. Sarah came to my side, her face pale but her eyes were dark. She didn't say anything. Not yet. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open and led my family inside. Inside, the party seemed to be over. A few adults were still sitting around, and Karen was cleaning the kitchen counter, as if it were a perfectly normal Sunday afternoon. My brother, David, was sitting on the sofa, looking at the television. They looked up when we entered. Silence filled the room. I led Grace to the middle of the living room. Then I turned and looked directly at my sister-in-law. My voice was flat, with not a ripple of emotion. "What happened to her hair?" Karen put the rag down. She crossed her arms and smiled faintly. "Oh, that? We were just playing a little joke. It needed a trim anyway." "A joke?" That wasn't my voice. It was Sarah's, and it was sharp as broken glass. "You call this a joke, Karen? Look at her." Sarah lunged forward, but I held up a hand, stopping her. "Not here. Not now. Sarah. Calm down," David said from the sofa, his voice weak. "It's just hair." "It's just hair?" Sarah screamed, her voice breaking with anger and disbelief. "Are you looking at my daughter and telling me that's just hair?" "Don't you yell in my house," Karen said, her voice now defensive. She wasn't listening. We told her to tie her hair up neatly to play with the kids, and she refused. The cold, heavy rage coiled in my chest. But anger is a wild animal. You don't let it run loose. You aim it at its target. "So you punished her," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Karen's self-satisfaction crumbled, replaced by naked jealousy. "Maybe if you hadn't shown off with that expensive salon hairstyle, this wouldn't have happened. You always think you're better than us, don't you?" There it was. The real reason. Petty, malicious, and inexcusable. Sarah moved to lunge again, and this time I had to hold her shoulder firmly. "Sarah," I said softly, but with authority, "we're leaving." I didn't wait for an answer. I turned to my daughter, who was still standing motionless in the middle of the room. "Grace, let's go." I put my hand on her back again, and my other hand still on Sarah's. We walked out of that house, leaving their guilty silence behind. The ride home was silent, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy. Sarah was trembling with fury. In the back seat, I heard Grace's muffled, suppressed sobs. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun, and I had the intelligence I needed. The silence in the car was heavier than any gear I had ever carried. When we got home, Sarah immediately took Grace to her room. I didn't follow them. A child needs her mother at times like this. I went into the kitchen and put on the kettle, an unconscious act, a habit of seeking normalcy in the midst of chaos. A few minutes later, Sarah returned to the living room alone. She stood in the middle of the room, hands clenched, still trembling. "Make her a cup of chamomile tea," I said softly. Sarah didn't move. "This isn't the first time, Michael." I stopped and looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Her, Karen." Her voice broke. "This has been happening for a long time. Just in smaller ways. Ways I tried to ignore. Tried to tell myself I was just imagining." She began to pace, her uncontrollable anger now pouring out in words. "It's the comments. Always those malicious comments wrapped in sweetness. Oh, Grace's dress is so pretty. It must have been expensive, right? Or, Grace seems to like shiny things. My Bella is much simpler." Sarah stopped, looking straight at me, her eyes flaring. She always compares. She always makes Grace feel like she's showing off, as if Grace being happy with a new thing is an insult to them. She does it right in front of Bella, sowing jealousy into another child's head. I listened, not interrupting. The pieces of information began to fit together. This wasn't a spontaneous act. This was a form of guerrilla warfare, small, constant attacks that I hadn't been aware of. "You weren't here, Michael," Sarah said. And the words were like a knife. You didn't see the glances. You didn't hear her tone when she said, "It must be hard, raising a child so spoiled." She said those things right in front of me and our daughter, and I tried to ignore it, because they're family. I thought I had to try for you. The cold anger in me now froze completely. It was no longer hot. It became something solid and purposeful. I was trained to recognize types of attacks, and this was it. A prolonged psychological campaign against my wife and daughter, taking place on my home turf while I was away. Failure as a soldier was nothing compared to the feeling of failure as a husband and a father. Right now, I had let the enemy breach my security perimeter. I dealt with it alone, Sarah whispered, exhausted. And today, she stopped hiding it. I walked over and placed my hands on her shoulders. "You don't have to deal with it alone anymore," I said firmly. "I'm home." She leaned her head on my chest. I held my wife, but my eyes were staring into space. Today's incident was no longer a single attack. It was the culmination of an entire campaign, and for every campaign, there is a counterattack. I had the context. Now, I needed the details of the main assault. I needed to hear it from my own witness. I made tea. 2 cups for Sarah and me. 1 chamomile for Grace. I brought them to the living room and placed them on the table. Sarah had sat down, but she was still as tense as a wire. I went to my daughter's door and knocked gently. "Grace, can you come out and talk to us?" A few seconds later, she came out, still in the clothes from the party, her hoodie pulled up to cover most of her ruined hair. She sat on the armchair across from us, huddled in on herself. I pushed the cup of tea toward her. "Drink a little." She shook her head. "Grace," I began, my voice calm. "You don't have to talk if you're not ready, but I need to know exactly what happened." She stared at the cup of tea. For a long time, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice chillingly flat, as if recounting someone else's story. I said no. Those were the first 4 words. I said, "Aunt Karen, please don't." But she still pushed me into the chair in the bathroom. She held my shoulders down. I glanced at Sarah. She put her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Grace continued, not looking at us. Grandma was standing at the door. She said, "It's just hair. Don't make a fuss." Then she started cutting. My chest tightened. Held her down. This wasn't a spontaneous act. This was a deliberate assault. "They were laughing," she added, and her voice trembled slightly. "Aunt Karen and Bella. They were laughing. Who else was there?" I asked, my voice now cold as steel. "Cousin Kevin," Grace whispered. "He was standing right in front of me, holding a tablet. He was filming. I heard him laughing. Bella even said, 'Cut the front, too.'" My hands clenched into fists under the table, my knuckles turning white. They filmed it. They turned the torment of my daughter into entertainment. "Where was Uncle David?" Sarah asked, her voice faltering. Grace took a deep breath. "He was standing in the hallway," he said. "He said I needed to learn a lesson in humility. That was the last straw." Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She lunged forward, hugging Grace and sobbing uncontrollably. The cry of a helpless, pained, and angry mother. Grace collapsed into her mother's arms, and finally, the tears she had held back all afternoon began to fall. I sat there, watching my wife and daughter hug and cry. My heart was a mess, a pain that doubled. sorrow for my daughter's trauma, and pain for my wife's suffering. The cold anger in me had completely frozen. No more emotions, just a mission. I waited until their crying subsided a little. Then I spoke, my voice clear and decisive. All right. This ends right here. They both looked up at me. I looked straight into Grace's eyes. Grace, what they did wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. She blinked, seemingly not understanding. It's called assault, I explained. They held you down against your will. They harmed you physically. That's a crime. Do you understand? Grace gave a small nod, her eyes starting to change from fear to something else, a realization. I won't do anything if you don't want me to, I said. This is your decision. Do you want to call the police? Silence filled the room, with only Sarah's stifled sobs. Grace looked at me, then at her mother, then back at me. She wiped away her tears, then she nodded, a decisive nod. Yes, the plan was set. The next phase was about to begin. The decision was made. Now, it was time to execute. All right, I said calmly. To file a report, we need evidence. The stronger the evidence, the better. It's our word against theirs. Grace looked up, her eyes now sharp. They filmed it. Are you sure? I'm sure, she said, her voice more resolute than I expected. Kevin was standing right in front of me. I took out my phone and placed it on the table. Do you have Kevin's number? Grace nodded. Do you think if you ask, your cousin will send the video? Sarah looked at me, skeptical. You think he'll do that? After what happened? He's a kid, I replied. An arrogant kid who thinks he did something cool and funny. He's not smart enough to realize he's holding evidence of a crime. I pushed the phone toward Grace. Just ask him normally. Don't show anger or sadness. See what happens. Grace took the phone. She hesitated for a moment. Then her small fingers scrolled on the screen. A few seconds later, she handed it back to me. On the screen was a simple message just sent. Hey Kevin, did you film that earlier? Send it to me. I nodded. Good. Now we wait. We didn't have to wait long. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed. A new message notification from Kevin. The message had no words. It was just a video file attached. And right after, a face with tears of laughter emoji. That was it. The admission and the mockery all in one icon. No remorse. No hesitation. Just as I predicted, their arrogance would be their fatal mistake. He sent it, I said, keeping my voice from showing emotion. Sarah leaned closer, and Grace sat up. I took a deep breath and clicked on the video file. The phone screen lit up. The video was less than a minute long, but it was the longest minute of my life. The video quality was very clear. I could hear Kevin laughing behind the camera. There was Grace sitting on the chair, sobbing, her voice a whisper. No, Auntie, please don't. There was Karen's hand grabbing a lock of her hair. There was the sound of scissors. There was Bella standing next to her, giggling and shouting, "Cut the front too." And there was my brother's voice, David, echoing from the hallway. She needs to learn a lesson. Everything was there. Clear, irrefutable. The video ended. The room fell silent. Sarah covered her mouth, her whole body trembling. Grace just stared at the now dark screen, her face no longer tear-stained, only hard. I locked the phone and put it in my pocket. All right, I said, standing up. We're going. Going where? Sarah asked, her voice still shaky. The police station, I replied, right now. I didn't change my clothes, neither did Sarah or Grace. No hesitation, no time to second guess. In the military, once you have enough intelligence and a clear objective, you act. Hesitation costs you. On the way to the police station, no one said a word. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window. Grace sat in the back, silent. But it was no longer the silence of a victim. I could feel it. It was the silence of a warrior preparing for the coming battle, and this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. The police station in the evening had a specific smell: old coffee, paper, and disinfectant. The static of the radio and the click of keyboards were the only sounds breaking the quiet. For me, this was a familiar environment, a place of procedure and system. I led Sarah and Grace to the front desk. An older officer looked up at us. "How can I help you?" "I want to report an assault," I said, my voice clear. "The victim is my daughter, 11 years old." The officer looked at Grace, then back at me, his demeanor immediately changing from indifferent to serious. He picked up the phone. A few minutes later, a man walked out. He was in his 40s, with a sturdy build and tired but sharp eyes. "I'm Detective Miller," he said. "Come into my office." We followed him into a small room, cluttered with papers. Miller sat down behind a metal desk, gesturing for us to sit opposite him. "All right," he said, taking out a notebook. "Tell me everything from the beginning." I started. I presented the events concisely, precisely, without emotion. A mission report. Sarah added details about the context, about the previous subtle bullying. Occasionally, Miller would turn to Grace, asking simple questions. "Is that right, Grace? Do you remember what they said?" Grace answered clearly. She didn't cry. She simply told the truth. "And you say you have evidence?" Miller asked, looking at me. "Yes. I took out my phone. They filmed it." Miller's eyebrows raised slightly. "Can I see it?" I unlocked my phone, opened the video file, and handed it to him. "My daughter will confirm that this is the video." Grace nodded. "Yes, it is." Miller took out a pair of headphones, plugged them into the phone, and pressed play. He stared at the screen. I watched his face. There was no dramatic expression, but I saw his jaw clench. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. When the video ended, he didn't say anything. He watched it again from start to finish. When he finished the second time, he took off the headphones and placed my phone on the table carefully, as if it were a weapon. He looked at Grace, then at Sarah, and finally at me. The weariness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. "We'll open a formal investigation," Miller said. "A child protection worker will be present for your daughter's next statement. You did the right thing by coming here." On the way home, the atmosphere in the car had changed. The heaviness was replaced by something else. A purposeful tension. "What happens next?" Grace asked from the back seat. "There will be a lot of paperwork," I answered honestly. "They will go talk to Uncle David and Aunt Karen. There might be a restraining order. There might be a court case. It won't be easy." She was silent for a moment. Then she said, just one word: "Good." That night, my phone rang. An unknown number. I knew who it was. I signaled for Sarah to be quiet and answered. "Are you insane?" Karen's voice screamed from the other end, without a single greeting. "Did you really call the police just because of some hair?" I stayed silent, letting her yell, "You're going to ruin this whole family. Do you understand? Is that what you want?" I waited until she had to stop to catch her breath. Then I said, my voice cold as ice, "You should have thought about that before you assaulted my daughter." The other end of the line was completely silent. I hung up. The game had begun, and that was my first move. The next morning, my phone rang again. This time it was David. His voice was no longer weak. It was a mix of panic and anger. "CPS came to my house," he said immediately, his voice trembling. "They came here this morning, Michael. Without warning, they wanted to see Bella's room. They asked if we left scissors lying around." "What the hell did you do?" I stayed silent, stirring my coffee, letting the silence speak for me. "Did you really go this far? Did you file a lawsuit?" No, I replied, my voice even. I just reported what you did. The rest, that's the consequence. It was just hair, Michael. He almost whined. There was that phrase again. Just some hair. They could never bring themselves to call it by its real name. I wrote back. Number, it's because you held a crying child down and cut her hair without her permission. It's because you stood there and called it a lesson. If that's how you raise your children, then I think you have a reason to be worried when CPS comes to visit. He tried to switch to pleading, saying I was tearing the family apart, that I could make them lose custody of their children. You should have thought about that, I said, before you let them touch my daughter. I hung up. I knew they wouldn't stop there. And they didn't. That afternoon, a cousin sent me some screenshots. It was a Facebook post by Karen, a brazenly twisted version of the truth. It was just a joke. Grace agreed to let us give her a new look. Michael and Sarah are overreacting. It's so sad they're dragging their daughter into this. Below were a series of comments from acquaintances. I know this family. They love their kids very much. Michael always seems a bit tense. Maybe we're only hearing one side of the story. They were trying to control public opinion. A classic tactic. I showed the phone to Sarah. She read it, her face pale with anger. Then I showed it to Grace. She scrolled through the comments, her lips pressed together. They're lying, she said softly. I know. People are believing them. I looked at my daughter. Not if we show them the truth. I paused for a moment. Are you okay with me posting the video? Grace looked up at me. The look in her eyes was no longer that of a scared victim. It was the look of someone who had been pushed to the wall and decided not to back down anymore. Post it, Dad, she said firmly. So I did. I didn't write a long post. No insults, no explanations. I just posted the video on my personal page, with the public setting, and I wrote a single caption. This is how my brother and sister-in-law taught my daughter a lesson when she said no. It exploded. The people who had just commented that I was overreacting in the morning came back that night and deleted their comments. Private messages started pouring in. Oh my God, Michael. I had no idea. That's horrifying. Why was that kid laughing when she was crying? This is clearly assault. You did the right thing. The truth, when presented irrefutably, has an incredible power. That night, Grace sat next to me on the sofa, watching the number of views and shares increase. I glanced at her. She was smiling slightly. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who was finally being heard. The smile of someone who knew she was no longer invisible. A few days later, my phone received a message. This time it was from my father. Michael, I didn't see you transfer the house money this month. Is there a problem? I stared at the message. For years, I had quietly sent a monthly amount to support my parents. It was what a son should do. I typed a reply without hesitation. No problem at all, Dad. I just decided not to use my money to provide for people who stood by and watched their granddaughter get assaulted. The reply came almost immediately. Are you punishing your mother and me because of some hair? Are you cutting us off? There was that phrase again. Always some hair. They could never call the event by its proper name. I wrote back. The number I'm choosing to protect my family, and if you ever try to contact Grace again, I will consider it harassment and will report it. My father didn't reply. A line had been drawn. The next week, Sarah and I took Grace back to a hair salon, not the old one, a different place. The stylist, a woman named Maria, had warm eyes and gentle hands. Sarah had explained the situation when she made the appointment. Maria didn't say cliches like fix it or make it beautiful again. Instead, she knelt down in front of Grace and said, All right, warrior. The old hair is gone. Now, let's create something that's all yours. What do you want to look like? An hour later, Grace looked at herself in the mirror. The jagged hair was gone, replaced by a chic pixie cut that highlighted her big eyes and cheekbones. She didn't look like a victim. She looked strong. She tilted her head, and then a real smile, the first one I had seen in a week, spread across her face. "I look cool," she said. And she did. The legal case proceeded. No one went to jail. I didn't expect that, but it left an indelible mark. Karen and David were both convicted of misdemeanor assault. They had criminal records. They had to pay a substantial fine. But the heaviest penalty for Karen, she was ordered by the court to complete a mandatory course in anger management and parenting. Their family would be under the supervision of Child Protective Services for a year. I heard their relationship was on the verge of collapse. I didn't feel glee. I just felt a cold sense of justice. Grace still doesn't want to see them again. Ever. She has made that clear, and I respect her decision completely. Now, she has the right to choose who is in her life. Sometimes Sarah asks me if we went too far, if there was another way. I think about my daughter's empty eyes that afternoon. I think about the laughter in the video, and I know the answer. In the military, you are taught to protect your perimeter at all costs. You identify the threat, you neutralize it, and you reinforce your defenses so it never happens again. I simply did my duty, and my family, my perimeter. It is now safe.